quick sanity check. Can you see a speed tipping slide?
Yes, looking
Awesome.
good. You're good to go.
Well, with that, I'm not going to start the timer just yet. So give me just like 2 minutes to do a quick primer here. Like I said, I'm Erin. I am in Kansas City, really excited to be able to join you guys today. I'm a fellow Tableau enthusiast. I'm a Tableau ambassador. I help run the user group here in Kansas City. And I'm fortunate enough to get to spend a lot of time with Tableau. I have my own analytics firm. I do a lot of Tableau training, Tableau consulting, get to spend a bunch of time in the tool, which is really fun. So today we're going to do speed tipping to give you a quick sort of outline a little bit of where we're going, because we're going to move really fast. So just to make a promise that there is some method to the madness, we've got our 60 tips, hopefully delivered in 30 minutes. And we're kind of splitting these up into 4 different categories. So we've got organized data, tidy workbooks, beautiful visualizations, and flexible dashboards. And what you'll see is each of these 4 categories has 15 tips, and they'll kind of cluster around a couple of different themes. So organized data, we'll talk about the data source pane, the data pane itself, calculated fields. We've got some tips for the menu bar workspace and exporting, some building shortcuts. We'll talk a little bit about labels and tooltips, and then we'll also kind of finish out with dashboard size, containers, and the layout tab. Quick preface, since you will see this data shortly, we are looking at a data set that has GDP by country. So we're looking at 217 countries, 1970 to 2018. So we've got 49 years in there. This is coming from the World Bank and inspired by a makeover Monday from last year, I believe. We've got life satisfaction scaffold onto that. So we have some countries. We've got 2005 to 2018, so less years there, and this is coming from the Global Happiness Center. So the data kind of looks like this. Could be the United States, could be Bulgaria, but we'll have the GDP for all of our different years, and then you'll see this life satisfaction data get introduced once we hit kind of the middle to late 2000s. One thing I always love about this little screenshot here is that when we do survey data and we ask, hey, tell us something 1 to 10, we often will ask people like, but you can't use 7, because we all gravitate towards 7, and we really kind of force people, all right, are you really 8 through 10, or are you 6 or lower? And I love to see that as a nation with our life satisfaction here in the United States, apparently we're all going right to that 7. So we will go really quickly. I will be, brief for the both of us. I'll be going as fast as I can for 60 tips in 30 minutes, but you should sit back and relax. I had to make a cheat sheet for this in order to actually deliver it. So all of it is written down. You can find the pocket guide on my website, as well as the Tableau workbook that you'll see me kind of working in, and we're recording this. So, if I skip over something a little quickly and you want to go back, that's one of the silver linings of getting to have this virtual and recorded. So I'll just kind of show you. I can actually, I'll drop this in the chat real fast in case you want to grab it. Where's the chat? Let's see. Here it is. So here's that website in case you want the tips all written down. And with that, I'm going to close this. We've got our workbook here. Quick sanity check. Can someone in Atlanta tell me that they are indeed seeing a Tableau speed tipping?
You're good.
We see it.
All right, and then also a little honesty here, 30 minutes on the cell phone, 12:12 if you're here, 8:12 if you're in Bulgaria, or if you're in Atlanta, 1:12 in here in Kansas City. And are we ready, set? Okay, timer's going. So speed tipping, here we go. Let's start with data. So I'm gonna jump to the data source pane real fast and show you 2 things. A lot of these tips are gonna be coming from the place of they call it the sort of the burden of knowledge, or sort of the difficulty of remembering what it was like to not know something beforehand. So a lot of these tips are going to be aimed at folks who are brand new to Tableau or in their first year, still getting to know the tool. But we've got stuff, I hope, that will help folks who are further along as well. So here we are with the data. Let's talk about this connection real fast. Tableau is going to default when you connect to a data source, to this live connection. And often that's what we want. We want to pull that data in, have our dashboards update in real time. But sometimes having an extract can be a helpful thing for drafting. So if you are connecting to a big SQL database and you need a local copy that can speed up your drafting, so you're not getting a little wait time in between dragging each pill out if you're working with big data, that can be a helpful button to know about. The other one I'll show you is this filters button. We have data source filters. So if you're new to Tableau, one of the first things we learn is how to bring fields into the filters card in the workspace, sometimes if you find yourself doing that over and over and over again, you might actually want a data source filter where you can go ahead and filter the data before you even get to that workspace. So here, for example, if we wanted to just look at one region and have all of our future visualizations filtered just to North America or just to Europe and Central Asia, we could do that here and kind of filter that data that executes higher in the query in Tableau, filter that data before we even get into our building space. Okay, new sheet. Let's hop into the building space. So we've got our data pane over here. This is where all of our beautiful columns and rows become pills we can actually work with. So a couple things to point out. Tableau will make its best guess on the data type, but you can change this. So this can be really helpful, especially with geographic data. Sometimes Tableau makes its best guess, but it's mistaking something that's actually a zip code or something that's a county and not a state. You can always adjust those here. First tip that I always do when I get into a new data set in Tableau is bring out the count or the number of records, depending on which version you are in Tableau. Here, it's basically a count. So if you're new to Tableau, what is this? These are the number of records you've actually brought into Tableau. You should always have a hypothesis in the back of your mind of how many records should you have. So here, I know I should have one record for 49 years for every country. So sometimes what I'll do is actually just build out with my count a little visualization as a sanity check that all of my data did indeed come through. So if I break this down by country, I'm going to see 49 records across. If I break this down by year, I should see one record per year per country. And it's just a quick check to make sure this happened across the board. We can go ahead and take this. I'm going to pull this down here. We can take this and put it on color and show the entire view. It's going to get a little wacky here. Bonus tip, you can always just hide your headers here. But what can be really nice about this is this quick sanity check that you do indeed have one record per year, per country. That's what's getting you. If you look down here, another tip, your 10,633 marks, 1 mark per record. So I'm a big proponent of make your hypothesis, how much data should you have and why, and then build a little visualization when you first get in to check the number of records. Coming back over to our data pane, I'm a big fan of folders. So being the little bit of an organization freak that I am, I think it's really helpful to go ahead and come here and toggle from this data source table to, which is the default, to grouping by folders, and then you can grab whatever you'd like, right click, and you can group by the folders. You can then take these different variables into either existing folders you've made or make new folders. I like to put most things in a folder and then leave a couple items that are kind of the workhorse variables, the ones I'm going to be pulling out all the time over here. Don't forget about your search bar. GDP, for example, with this data set, we've got lots of versions of it, but sometimes when you are connecting to a database and you've got hundreds maybe of variables coming in, it can be really helpful to remember that that search bar is there. Another thing is these default properties you can set per individual data pill. So if you know you're going to be pulling out, for example, the current or the constant GDP, and you want it to always be dollar signs, or you want that growth to always be a percentage, go ahead and set those here, your format or your aggregation for the variable itself. And then every time you pull it out, you'll be set. I think this is actually a bonus tip, but you can always add a comment. Let's see, hello world, which is fitting because we actually have people all over the world. And then when you hover over that variable, you get that little bit of metadata. This can be a helpful way to either communicate with colleagues or clients about, hey, here's what this variable actually means. Couple more things, you'll notice that I've got my little hierarchy set up here. This is a really wonderful thing that allows you to tell Tableau to establish a connection between the region and the short country name here. These are always nested. It goes from region to country. So if you have inherent established relationship, some sort of hierarchical relationship in the data, you can always create that, establish that relationship in the data pane. And if you ever swap out your data set and now need to reconnect certain variables that have slightly different names, let's say in the new spreadsheet, someone just sent you region has now become regions, plural, you can go to click the drop-down menu and replace the references and say, hey, Tableau, now region is actually regions. When you click on replace references, you'll see all your variables right here and you can clean it up. When you lose that relationship, everything turns red and there's exclamation points. It looks really scary sometimes when you swap out the data set behind it, but usually it's pretty easy to get things back in line. Last thing with the data pane, if it ever disappears like that, which can be really terrifying the first time it happens, just note that it's hiding down here. So you'll see this little toggle that gives you more space to work, and it toggles back up. I remember the first time that I actually lost my data entirely, I was terrified. Quick calculations. I love to use a prefix when I name my calculations. I always start with CALC so that A, they cluster together, and B, they are easy to remember that I made them. Usually if there's a problem, I introduced it into the logic, and it's helpful to have a little reminder to say, hey, Erin, you produced this. It might be something that you need to fix. Your syntax or your functions for Tableau, if you're new, all of those functions are hiding behind this tiny little arrow that probably should be bigger. Shout out to Tableau. But all of these functions are here, and a lot of these will look very similar if you're used to working in R or Python or Excel. You'll see a lot of overlap here. This apply button, I always love to point it out to people who might be new, because you can go in, work on your, your logic here, and then go ahead and apply it to the visualization behind. And when you're really up against a wall trying to get something to work that just won't go, having that apply button is really nice, because you don't have to keep opening and closing the work box here. Last thing in the organized data section, tip 15, the calculation is valid does not mean the calculation is accurate. Those are two very different things. The calculation is valid means, hey, Tableau can execute the syntax you wrote. You've remembered to put all your close parens where they need to be, all of your commas where your quotes are in the right place. But it doesn't mean that it actually produced the thing that you meant to. Tableau is very literal because it is a computer. So my number one recommendation with calculations is, as soon as you see that, yes, the calculation is valid, go build a calculation or a visualization that tests that indeed you have built the calculation you intended. Otherwise, I promise it will be your boss or your advisor or someone else, a client. They will be the ones to figure it out. Okay, that's organized data. We're moving right along to tidy workbooks. So I'm a big fan, again, of keeping the workbook pretty tidy. We talked about some tips for keeping the data pane tidy. Let's talk about the workbook itself. We can show how we want to see all of our visualizations. So if you want to look at all of your worksheets at once, you can come down to the bottom right-hand corner here and see all of them. This can be really helpful if you've got a dense workbook with lots of different sheets. You can also make it kind of a film strip, so you get this little preview of what it is, and then you can put it with tabs. And remember, you can always change the color of any of these tabs. Sometimes I will turn something red if I know that I need to go back and fix some logic or something's broken, to remind myself of where I'm at. Also, you can hide the sheets, right? So if we go to a dashboard like this that's further along, there is a lot hiding behind the scenes in this dashboard. There's a lot of different worksheets. These are all hidden behind here. So if you're unpacking something that you've downloaded from Tableau Public or opened from a colleague, and you're thinking, gosh, this map has to live somewhere, where is it? You can unhide all of the sheets here. You'll see them proliferate out, and then you can rehide them when you're done. Another note you'll see here is, I'm a big fan of some sort of naming convention that is helpful when you're working with lots of sheets, especially if you're going to be handing that off to a client or a colleague who has to decode what you have actually built in your workbook. So sometimes I'll do, hey, if this is all going into dashboard 1, let's give this a little prefix of 1 point something. Another thing I'll do is put what kind of chart type it is. So life satisfaction here exists both as a text and as this little spark line. So if I've got multiple versions of something that would be named similar, going ahead and putting the chart type can be a helpful thing as well. Very important. I'm going to hide all of these sheets again, sort of collapse it up. When we see this difference between duplicate and copy, so we have two different options here. If you duplicate the dashboard, it will make a new dashboard, but it will point to the same underlying sheets. Whereas if you copy and then paste a dashboard, it will actually replicate all of the individual sheets underneath here. So in something like this that may have 10 or so sheets underneath, duplicating it just makes a new dashboard, same underlying sheets, the perfect thing to do if you're just tweaking the layout of your dashboard. But if you're looking to actually start messing with those underlying visualizations, that can be a really helpful thing to just copy and paste the entire thing. The other thing that I will go ahead and say here is, let's jump over to the workspace itself. So if you're actually working on creating a new sheet, which is often what we need to do when we get frustrated and the equivalent of the analog, crumple up the paper, throw it towards the wastebasket. I'm always a fan, just make a new sheet. Don't delete anything that you've built. But this is a pretty flexible environment. All of these cards can move around. You can hide the cards if you don't need them. Of course, if you decide you want to reset how Tableau initially had it, that is here. You can also introduce cards that aren't usually showing. So one of the ones that I think is most underutilized is caption. Let's hop over here where we've actually built something and show the caption. This will do its best to give us a little summary, verbally written out, of what's happening in this sheet. Sometimes that's helpful, but this is also a fantastic way just to have a text box on the actual worksheet itself. This can be a great place to leave notes for yourself, notes for a colleague, links to inspiration, whatever it might be. So that caption, I think, is one of the most underutilized things. Here's a quick tip. We are all used to using the filters card here. Usually we take a pill to filters and then we show the filter, but you can also cheat. You can go right to region, for example, and just use this show filter button here. It'll add it to filters, add it to region. That'll speed you up. And like we talked about before, the summary stats down here can be really helpful as a sanity check when you know, hey, how many records should I have? How much data should be sitting there? That can be really important too. When it comes to exporting the data, or images, actually, here's a couple tips for that. So I would say that Tableau's, as someone who has a photography background, the initial exporting function of Tableau was a little rocky. The images were pretty grainy. They have gotten so much better. So if you haven't used this in a while, come back and try it. You can go to the dashboard and export the image. I think this is a fantastic way to give colleagues, clients, a little sneak preview, something to drop in Slack or drop in an email attachment to give a little sneak preview of what you've built and try to entice people to log into Tableau server or actually open the workbook that you're emailing them. But people don't always have Tableau right there with them. They're not always moving slow enough to have that time. So exporting an image can be a great thing. Also, remember, you can always click on any individual mark and say view data and say show full data, and you can see the individual records that are creating that mark, which can be a very helpful tip while you're decoding things. And if you actually need to save your workbook, which we've all hopefully done before, a quick note for those who may be new. The difference between a packaged workbook and a Tableau workbook, a packaged workbook is going to take that underlying data, scoop it all up, and include it when you send that attachment or when you save that workbook. A Tableau workbook, TWB, no X, is going to be the Tableau infrastructure, the pipes, but nothing going through it. So if you are waiting for someone, for example, to connect to a database and then authenticate themselves, TWB might be fine. If you're packaging up an Excel worksheet and you know that the audience doesn't have that data with them, you'll want to use that TWBX, but you want to be careful about where you send it because that data is all included. And then something I learned about in the last year was this export as version button, which was really neat. This is if you're working with clients or colleagues that might be on an older version. Here I'm working actually on an older version because of what a client's on, but you can go ahead and say, hey, if you're working with someone that's on 2019.2 and you happen to build what you built in a different version, you can export the version to match what those colleagues are actually on. All right, I'm checking my timer. We are right at 15:30, so we're doing great. We're halfway through. Let's make a visualization. I'm gonna make a new sheet and I'm gonna build a bump chart because the bump chart has just always had a special place in my heart. So visualization tips. We all start with this show me panel. I'm a big fan of hiding it and learning how to build each of the chart types by yourself. What goes on rows, what goes on columns, what goes on the marks card, and why. It's slow initially, it's fast in the long run. It'll speed you up. So if you can do it, hide that show me button. Here's another tip. Let's say you've got a variable that has got a lot of different ways that it can be aggregated. Time is a very common version. We've got year here. Maybe I want a continuous year. Maybe I want a discrete year. But if I pull it out, I'm going to have to go ahead and change it. If you hold down Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC and pull it out, so I'm holding right now Option on my keyboard and dropping year, it will go ahead and ask me, how do you want this aggregated? That can be really helpful too if you're trying to do a count distinct on a variable that has a ton of underlying items. So here, I'm going to go ahead and choose that continuous year. Get my little timeline here. Let's go ahead and grab GDP. I'm going to take the constant 2010 so that I'm adjusting for inflation. There's the financial crisis. I'm going to go ahead and break that out by country name. bonus tip, I don't think I have this written down, but if you get this warning about how many items, are you sure you want to add them all, and you're connected to a local extract that you know the amount of the size and you're comfortable with it, great, click add all members. If you are connecting to a database that has an unknown, potentially really huge number of items, maybe don't add all members. Take this warning more seriously, or you might get a call from IT that said, Erin, you just took the server down. We want to make sure we're not those people in Tableau. We want IT and everyone to have a good relationship with Tableau. So we will add all members. We will get something that looks very helpful if you're only interested in the top countries here in GDP, totally unhelpful if you're looking at the bottom here. This looks like pickup sticks. So what we want to do is create a visualization where we can easily see the top 20 countries and how that's changed over time. So I'm going to go ahead and build a bump chart for that. I'm going to change this to a rank. It's going to turn into spaghetti. Bear with me. We're going to change the compute using from table across to make one line per country. We see something interesting here. We see that we have a lot more data for countries than the later we get into the years than initially, which means we know why we have our null values here. If you don't know why you have your null values, go investigate first. If you know why you have your null values, you can right click and hide that indicator. So for our bump chart, let's go ahead and edit the axis. You can always reverse the axis, which can be a nice little tip. So now we're going to put the one going down up top. And we're going to go ahead and show the filter. So kind of a derivative off that earlier tip. You can show a filter off cards, pills that are on cards in your visualization, which really speeds us up here because we've already done the rank and told it how to compute. So I can show the filter. Now, instead of getting the GDP filter, I get a rank filter, and I can say, all right, just show me the top 20 countries. We can always change our color palette if you want here. So if we want to do something, I don't know, a little brighter, you can always, where is it? There's the hue cycle. This assign palette is really fun. Also, you can always just double click and get the hex code right here on the card. So if you are in the branding world or you're trying to make friends with people in public relations, asking for the hex codes from them is the fastest way to make friends with public affairs. And you can grab the branding and get really specific right there. We can say, okay. And if we want to undo, we can undo. And from here, I want to go ahead and add some labels. So similarly, with the option key, I can hold down the command key, and I'm going to grab this constant GDP rank and put it on the label. Oh, not going to take it off. We're going to duplicate it. Got to hold down that command key. We'll put it on label. We see the labels go a little wacky here. So remember, you can always go into label and use some of these pre-existing, like most recent options here. These I think are really underutilized and really helpful. We can go ahead and add the short name to the label as well. This gets a little messy. So remember, you can go into the label, click this little ellipses. I feel like it's pretty hidden, not really sure why, but we can go country name, give us our rank. I'm going to make that bold so we have a nice solid line for the eye to follow. And then again, that apply button, I can go ahead and move this across, see, does it do what I want it to do? Yep, it's working. And then I'm going to go ahead and change that alignment, get everything to the right and to the top, and that'll clean up my labels. Another thing I'm going to do here, I've got this kind of hanging off the side. So I'm going to adjust the axis. I'm going to go ahead and fix this. So it's going to start exactly when I know my data starts. So I'm going to go 1970. Oh, change it, 1/1/1970, and we'll go to 1/1/2018. That'll go ahead and tighten that up. We can, I don't think this is written down, bonus tip, you can always change the size of your marks, even if there's nothing actually on the marks card. So we can kind of slim that down if we want. And then last thing here, let's format it. So we have, our eye is following the lines, but we have some grid lines behind the scenes that are kind of throwing us off. So we can go ahead and format. We'll get our formatting pane where our data pane used to be. You can always X out to get back to your data. But a quick note here about the difference between the borders in this little icon and the lines in this little icon. So the borders are going to be the scaffolding that's around your visualization. The lines are going to be the things that are actually inside where the marks are also existing. So here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these 0 lines. I'm going to go ahead and actually knock out these axis rulers, axis ticks. I can see I still have something happen in there. Go over to rows. I'm going to kick out those grid lines, and I'm just kind of cleaning this up. And the reason that we want to do that, usually, I like to think of an analog version. If you're third grade and you're asked to draw a chart on some graph paper, you're going to draw out your axes so that you can actually create an accurate visualization. And then when you're done, you might go ahead back with an eraser and erase the scaffolding that's no longer needed. When we switch from analog and go to a digital tool, Tableau is generating a lot of that scaffolding that we might not actually want. So make sure what you keep when it comes to formatting is actually intentional, as opposed to something that just, oh, this was the default and there we go. So we've got our lines, we've fixed our axes, we're all set with our labels. Let's talk about our tooltips really quickly. The first tip that I'll have for the tooltips is show your work. So if we are using rank here, what is that rank based off? Well, it's off the constant GDP. So let's add that to the tooltip. This helps your audience build confidence that yes, indeed, they are understanding why things are ranked, why they are ordered the way they are. Second thing, we encourage people to click on our visualizations, but when they click on a tooltip, or on a mark and they get their tooltip, the default is actually to show all of these buttons, these command buttons. And as soon as someone accidentally clicks here, they've broken the entire visualization. They get very anxious. We're trying to set them up for a positive experience. So helpful guardrails, go back to your tooltips and uncheck that include command buttons so that when someone is exploring the way you're asking them to, when they click, they just see the things that they should see. Only include those buttons if you actually need them. Last thing, get your tooltips tidied up before you actually start duplicating your work if you're pretty happy with your work. So I'm a big fan of, hey, I drafted something and it's looking pretty good, but is there something else out there that might look better? I like to, at that point, go ahead and tidy up the tooltips so that when I right click and I duplicate the sheet and all my effort is duplicated here, that I still have my tooltips cleaned up in case maybe I want to make this a slope chart, right? And just keep the first and the last year. I love slope charts. It's like, what's the beginning and the end? There is a very definitive question answered, right? If you just want to know the start and end over the last 50 years of GDP, you see China just rocket to the top. So this can be a really fascinating way to iterate, keep duplicating and see if there's more there. Have you really tapped that vein dry? But also make sure if you do your tooltips up front, then they keep being all tidy and you're not replicating more work for yourself. Okay. Let's see how we're going. We're into our last dashboard, 7 minutes. We should be right on time. I'm going to move this on over. Let's talk about dashboards. So if we look at a dashboard that has been built, we are often thinking about how to make this on our own computer, as opposed to where it's actually going to live. Where will the audience interact with it? So tip number 1 here, always make sure you think about where is the final living space of the dashboard and test the size and the formatting of that dashboard before you do a ton of layout work. Make sure your size works well where it's living. If it's going to Tableau server, it's going to have extra framing around it. Try it on a desktop, try it on a laptop. Another really good hint that I like to use a lot is if you know that folks are going to be opening this dashboard, they're going to be on a computer. You're not worried about that, but you're not sure whether they're going to be on their laptop at home or maybe a larger desktop at the office. One of the things I love to do is just introduce a range. Keep the ratios identical, but let that dashboard breathe and expand, contract as needed, depending on where it's being viewed. So if you take this dashboard onto a bigger screen, it will expand. And that makes the audience feel like, hey, they made it just for me. Nothing is sort of a bigger red flag that this visualization was made by someone else for their screen than seeing the dashboard look kind of misconstrued when it renders on their own computer. All right, let's talk about containers. They're so helpful, and yet I would argue somewhat finicky. So here's a new dashboard. We bring out a container. We have horizontal containers, things that will line up like this, vertical containers, things that will line up like this. So when we bring them out, they have a blue sort of frame around them. And the first thing I always do when I bring out a container is add 2 blank objects. These give me the ability to go ahead and make it much easier to introduce something in between. Sometimes landing something in a container can be difficult, so it can be really helpful to go ahead and put your blanks here, and then you can delete them as you'd like. Another thing that I learned very recently actually was that you can double click on this little 4-pronged arrow on a frame and it will take you 1 level up. So if you're like, where does this item live? Double click, you can see that it lives in this container. This little filter that was brought in actually lives in its own container. So if I get rid of that, just gonna delete the container, that might be what I want. Another trick, I love to use this, distribute contents evenly. It's a great way to make flexible dashboards that really feel tailored and polished. When you do that, you'll see that these stay the same. This is different than actually fixing the width. So if I undo that and I say, hey, give this some breathing room, you'll notice now that this item, I can go ahead and fix that and say, this should always take up this amount of space. So kind of working together. Do you want things to be distributed evenly, or do you want them to be fixed to a specific area? One other really neat feature that was introduced, and I'm going to go ahead and pull in a floating. So this is the difference between floating and tiled. Tiled is living behind this in a very specific way. If I pull this way, this container is getting bigger. It's affecting the larger container around. Floating objects are going to be wherever you actually place them. Less flexible, sometimes necessary. One neat thing that actually now you can do with tiled as well, but is this little drop down. This is the show hide button. And you can actually have a whole container that will hide up and contract and expand. This can be a great place if you've got a lot of filters or something that or instructions that you kind of want to have available for folks, but get it out of the way most of the time. That can be a really helpful thing. So when you look at how does that stuff actually work with the a dashboard that's pre-built, for example, click on an item, double click, you can see this is living in a horizontal container. Double click again, this is living in a vertical container, double click again, and you can see, all right, now we're back to horizontal container. It takes a little time to get the hang of it, but it makes dashboards that are very flexible and very polished in terms of design. So I'm a fan. Last thing, we've got our layout tab here. So when I look at this is where I actually can find my XY coordinates. For example, I'm seeing that here, this is the container for the entire dashboard. It's at 0, 0. And when I come into something that should be 16 pixels in, because I've added one more layer, I've added 16 pixels of outer padding, that is going to hit right at 16 XY in both directions. You can also see on the background here, or on the layout tab, where the background is. So how are we making this container a light gray? We've done it here. And our outer padding and inner padding. So inner padding is what's giving that breathing room between the text here and the outer container here, or the inner padding that's giving us that little bit of space around text. The outer padding, what you can see is I don't have any outer padding around here. It's going right to the side. If I, for example, added 16 pixels, keep your eye right here between these two gray containers, you can see that outer padding is going to push everything right in. Inner padding, outer padding, let's see, background color. Last two tips. So your item hierarchy is down here. Always at the very end, when you're wrapping up with your polished dashboard, take a look at what actually is sitting in here. You should be able to click through, and this should all be logical about what is actually sitting here. Sometimes when you start building, Tableau will introduce a bunch of extra containers that are unnecessary, and you can kick those out. The last tip here is I found out from a colleague just the other day that you can actually name these. So here we're looking at all of our instructions. You can right click and you could say this is instructions. So that might be helpful if you're collaborating with another individual, you've got your dashboard really set up, you're happy with it, but you want to make sure that they understand in that item hierarchy, again, the hierarchy of everything living on your dashboard, all of the objects that you may have introduced over here, how are they all living together? That is where you can find that. So with that, okay, 56 seconds left. So I think we are all set. I will turn off this timer and I will go ahead and stop there. Let's see, do we have any questions?
That was incredible. I mean, I was pointing out and on the side over here, and you probably see it, but I was saying that usually when I see tips and tricks, it's a lot of functionality, which is useful, but you tied everything back to use case and like that.
Thank you.
I'm blown away.
Excellent. Well, any questions that I can answer?
It looks like we didn't have any questions, just a lot of, right now, I think people are speechless, mind blown. And it's a good thing you have that link so they can go back and revisit.
So let me pull that up in case, because this is,
Yeah, we did put that in into chat, and I see that you have the video, but you also have a little shortcut guide.
Yep. So we've got the workbook, the video of a previous version when I did this in Kansas City for our group. And then there's this pocket guide here that I'll kind of zoom out so you can see it if it wants to load. So this is all of the tips. So everything that we went through here, And
Wow.
maybe I missed some. So if you find one, you're like, wow, she didn't talk about that. You may get a bonus tip in there somewhere. But these are all here just so that if anyone wants to go back and look. And again, that all is living on my website, datadozen.com/Tableau.
I love this, Erin. Thank you. That is so cool. I love that PDF at the end, like all of the tips together. I haven't seen anything like that. So that is so cool.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad, guys. Thank you so much for including me in the Atlanta and the Bulgaria tug. It's so fun to get to connect with other folks, especially during a time where, we all miss each other. So we miss, TC and all of that. So it's really fun to get to connect with another group.